Let's shatter a pervasive, deeply ingrained, and fundamentally disempowering illusion right from the very start, because your authentic freedom depends on it. You have likely been meticulously taught, subtly yet relentlessly conditioned throughout your entire life to be perpetually, almost pathologically accessible, to politely smile even when genuine emotion, perhaps anger, sadness, frustration, or profound disagreement, churns violently beneath the carefully constructed surface, to reflexively, almost automatically respond immediately to every message, every demand, every interruption, even when silence would be far wiser, more strategic, or simply more appropriate for your own well-being. To feel compelled, almost obligated to endlessly justify yourself, offering elaborate, often convoluted explanations and rationalizations for your choices, your feelings, your boundaries, even when no one has explicitly, legitimately asked for them, perhaps especially when they haven't. You have been systematically, insidiously conditioned by societal norms that prize agreeableness over authenticity, by upbringing that perhaps punished dissent or prioritized others' comfort, perhaps by your own internalized fears of rejection or disapproval, to be consistently reachable, easily moldable to others' expectations, utterly predictable, almost programmable in your reactions. And perhaps the most tragic, most soul-crushing part of this pervasive conditioning, you likely accepted this state of being, this constant draining accessibility, this lack of psychological sovereignty, as if it was simply normal, natural, unavoidable, the default, unquestionable way to navigate the complex world and maintain fragile relationships. But pause now, truly pause. Interrupt the relentless forward momentum of your conditioned responses and ask yourself with unflinching, perhaps uncomfortable honesty, what has this constant, often exhausting, frequently resentment-inducing accessibility truly, genuinely done for you? Has it authentically brought you lasting inner peace? A sense of unshakable calm amidst life's inevitable storms? Has it endowed you with genuine, undeniable personal power? A sense of agency and control over your own destiny? Has it fostered deep, reciprocal, respectful relationships based on mutual authenticity? Likely not. More often than not, far more often than you might care to admit. It has inadvertently, tragically transformed you into an emotional puppet, reflexively, predictably reacting to every subtle gesture, every carelessly spoken word, every perceived slight, every hint of disapproval, every manipulative emotional hook cast by those around you. You dance on strings you didn't even realize were attached. People consciously or unconsciously, intuitively, or deliberately read you. They sense your energy, your boundaries, or lack thereof, your points of vulnerability. And when they perceive accurately that you predictably jump, flinch, appease, or crumble with every slight emotional push, every implied criticism, every demand disguised as a request, what do they instinctively, often unconsciously do? They often push you harder. They test your limits relentlessly. They exploit your predictable reactivity for their own gain, their own comfort, their own sense of control, because, yes, make no mistake whatsoever, the world, the social jungle, is indeed full of individuals who are experts, whether intentionally through calculated manipulation or intuitively through their own unhealed patterns at pressing emotional buttons, at finding your weaknesses, at leveraging your insecurities. But crucially, fundamentally, those buttons only work, only elicit the desired, predictable, often self-sabotaging reaction if they remain constantly readily within easy reach, perpetually accessible to external manipulation, to the probing fingers of others' agendas and projections. And this, precisely, this existential predicament, is where the profound, often misunderstood, yet ultimately deeply empowering concept enters the picture, the conscious, deliberate, strategic cultivation of becoming psychologically, emotionally unreachable. Not unreachable in the simplistic, defensive sense of building impenetrable, isolating walls out of fear, bitterness, or past hurt. Not unreachable as a desperate, fearful means of escaping the messy, complex, yet vital realm of human connection altogether, but rather unreachable understood as a deliberate, conscious act of profound dominance, primarily fundamentally dominance over yourself, over your own reactive impulses, over your conditioned patterns, over your fear-driven responses, unreachable as an unwavering expression of absolute self-control of emotional sovereignty, unreachable as a powerful, undeniable manifestation of deep, authentic inner power, A power that doesn't need to shout or posture because its strength resides in its centered stillness. We are not talking here about striving to build emotional walls so thick, so impermeable, that you cease to feel altogether, becoming numb, detached, emotionally deadened. That is mere repression, a different, perhaps even more insidious kind of psychological prison, a denial of your very humanity. We are talking instead about consciously, deliberately learning not to automatically react to every external stimulus, every emotional provocation, every demand for your attention or energy. Because understand this fundamental game-changing dynamic. Every single time you react impulsively, defensively, emotionally, without conscious thought or strategic consideration, you expose yourself. You reveal your vulnerabilities, your insecurities, your triggers, your Achilles' heels. Every time you emotionally explode in anger, desperately excessively justify yourself, or rush frantically, anxiously to explain why you did what you did, why you feel what you feel, why you need what you need, you are effectively, willingly, often, foolishly, giving away your precious, irreplaceable personal power, handing the reins of your inner state over to external forces. Strategic silence is not coldness or indifference. It is profound strategy, a conscious choice to observe, assess and respond deliberately if at all. Cultivated mystery, the deliberate withholding of unnecessary information, the refusal to be an entirely open book, is not apathy or disengagement. It is profound, almost magnetic allure, a source of unspoken influence. Consider those rare, often enigmatic individuals you may have encountered in your life, the ones who seem to effortlessly enter a room, a meeting, a conversation, and often without uttering a single commanding word, somehow almost mysteriously dominate the atmosphere, shift the energy, command unspoken attention and respect. Their power, their undeniable presence stems not necessarily or even usually because they shout the loudest boast, the most ostentatiously, possess the highest formal status, or wield the most obvious instruments of authority. It emanates rather far more potently, far more subtly, because they have mastered the nuanced, often counterintuitive, yet immensely powerful art of not being an entirely open book. They consciously, deliberately choose not to readily, indiscriminately grant everyone access to the intricate, vulnerable, complex landscape of their interior world. Their deepest thoughts, their rawest emotions, their strategic intentions, their hidden doubts, simply in exchange for the fleeting, often meaningless crumbs of external attention, superficial validation, or temporary social acceptance. They don't feel the compulsive, often anxiety-driven need to rush to explain, to constantly justify, to perpetually please, to smooth over every potential discomfort. Why? Because they understand something absolutely fundamental, something that the vast majority of perpetually accessible, overly reactive people still fail to grasp. The less you readily give away of your emotional reactions, your inner thoughts, your strategic intentions, your desperate need for approval, the more others often paradoxically, almost magnetically want to know. The more intrigued, curious, perhaps even slightly intimidated they become. The more space you create for their projections, their assumptions, their desire. Human beings on a deep, often unconscious psychological level are often strangely powerfully addicted to, fascinated by what they cannot easily control, what they cannot fully possess, what they cannot completely understand, to that which remains slightly mysterious, elusive, unpredictable, to that which subtly, confidently escapes their grasp, their judgment, their attempts at categorization or manipulation, to that which refuses, with quiet, unwavering dignity, to readily yield, to conform, to bend to the often arbitrary, frequently self-serving judgments or expectations of other people. That is precisely why individuals who cultivate consciously and strategically a degree of healthy, authentic unreachability, not arrogance, not hostility, but a quiet self-possession, often generate such profound, almost inexplicable intrigue, such undeniable magnetism. Because they don't easily bend to external pressure, they don't crumble under criticism, they don't desperately seek external validation. Because they possess the inner strength, the profound wisdom, the cultivated discernment to know how, and perhaps more importantly when, to consciously, decisively let go. And here we arrive at another absolutely crucial, often terrifyingly difficult, yet profoundly liberating point. Learning to effectively let go is not fundamentally an act of loss, weakness, or resignation. As our clinging, fearful egos often perceive it, it is paradoxically powerfully an act of profound liberation, of reclaiming your energy, your focus, your very soul. Let go of that suffocating, draining relationship that consistently diminishes your spirit rather than nourishes it, even if the thought of being alone terrifies you. Let go of that soul-crushing, meaningless job that depletes your vital energy and offers little genuine purpose, even if the fear of financial insecurity paralyzes you. Let go of that burdensome, guilt-inducing commitment that ties you down, restricts your growth without offering genuine joy, authentic connection or alignment with your core values, and crucially, perhaps most challengingly, learn to let go of the exhausting, futile need to understand everything perfectly, the compulsive, ego-driven urge to always be right, the desperate, insatiable craving to be universally liked, validated, accepted, approved of. Because the more intensely, desperately, rigidly you try to hold on to people who no longer belong in your life, to situations that no longer serve you, to outcomes you cannot ultimately control, to external approval that is inherently fickle and unreliable, the more psychologically dependent, the more emotionally entangled, the more energetically depleted you inevitably, tragically become. And dependence, let us be crystal clear, is the very antithesis, the absolute negation of authentic personal power, of inner sovereignty. You simply cannot ever cultivate genuine psychological unreachability, true inner sovereignty, if you remain perpetually, desperately, fundamentally in need of external validation, external approval, external applause, external permission to exist authentically. Stopping the deeply ingrained, often unconscious habit of over-explaining is also a powerful practical way of practicing this art of letting go, of reclaiming your power. You do not have to justify every single one of your decisions, your boundaries, your feelings, to everyone who happens to ask, or even to yourself sometimes. You do not have to provide elaborate defensive reasons, simply to protect your own precious inner peace or to enforce a necessary non-negotiable boundary. You certainly absolutely do not have to waste your breath trying to convince anyone, particularly those already predisposed against you, that you are fundamentally a good person worthy of respect, because here is the stark, often liberating truth that cuts through layers of social conditioning. Those individuals who are predisposed to judge you negatively, to misunderstand you, to project their own issues onto you, already possess a pre-written, often rigid story about you in their minds. They are rarely, if ever, seeking objective data, genuine understanding, or rational discourse. They are primarily, often desperately, looking for confirmation of their existing biases, their preconceived notions, their preferred narrative. Don't feed their narratives. Don't engage in their games. Learn the profound, often underestimated power of shutting up, of strategic silence, and letting time, consistency, and your unwavering actions speak far more eloquently, far more powerfully, far more definitively for you than any defensive words ever could. In a world utterly saturated with incessant shouting, performative outrage, desperate clamoring for attention, and the endless noise of superficiality, the one who possesses the inner strength, the unwavering composure, the strategic wisdom to remain consciously, purposefully silent, often holds the true unspoken control. In a world where everyone seems desperately, frantically clamoring to be seen, noticed, validated, liked, the one who cultivates the capacity, the courage to become psychologically invisible when necessary, to operate effectively from the shadows, paradoxically, powerfully becomes immensely influential, often shaping outcomes without leaving fingerprints. Authentic, potent presence is not about frantically trying to be everywhere at once, constantly available, perpetually on, desperately seeking relevance. It is about possessing the profound inner quality, the centered stillness, the authentic weight of being utterly impossible to ignore when you are consciously, deliberately present. And you only truly achieve that level of potent, resonant presence when you definitively, irrevocably stop reacting automatically, habitually, unconsciously to every external stimulus, every fleeting provocation. When you cease allowing yourself, your precious inner state, to be emotionally dragged through the mud, destabilized, controlled by every carelessly spoken word, every subtle negative gesture, every implicitly imposed expectation, every manipulative projection thrown onto you by others seeking to offload their own discomfort or exert control. Many people mistakenly, tragically confuse being psychologically unreachable, strategically unavailable, with being emotionally cold, callously detached, or defensively shut down. But it is not fundamentally about coldness or fear or withdrawal from life. It is about cultivated emotional maturity, about profound self-awareness, about conscious choice. The individual who reflexively, predictably reacts to everything, whose emotional state is perpetually dictated by external events and others' moods, is effectively undeniably ruled by their environment, a psychological puppet dancing helplessly to external tunes they didn't choose. The individual who consciously, deliberately chooses when and how to respond based on deep inner clarity, unwavering values, and strategic awareness of the dynamics at play, effectively, powerfully rules their own life, their own inner kingdom. And that, my friend, is not fearful isolation. It is profound, liberating inner sovereignty, true self-control. The bedrock of this unreachability is not synonymous with emotional repression. Repression involves unconsciously, fearfully pushing down unwanted, uncomfortable feelings, thoughts, or impulses out of shame, guilt, or a terror of losing control. It creates inner tension, breeds resentment, festers beneath the surface, often leading to eventual explosive outbursts, passive aggression, or psychosomatic illness. Self-control, conversely, the kind we are cultivating here, arises from clarity, from conscious awareness, from deliberate choice. Choosing deliberately, strategically, not to fall for obvious, predictable provocations designed to elicit a reaction. Choosing consciously, not to respond immediately, or perhaps sometimes not at all, to messages, demands, or criticisms that clearly don't deserve your precious time, energy, or attention. Choosing strategically wisely to withdraw from a potentially toxic situation, a draining dynamic, a no-win argument in time before you become irreversibly entangled, before you become cast, perhaps unfairly, as the villain in a dramatic, destructive story that was never truly yours to begin with. Choosing the profound, often disarming power of silence when you intuitively know with deep certainty that any further explanation, any attempt at justification, any impassioned plea will change absolutely nothing, will only further deplete your energy and potentially give your opponent more ammunition. Because sometimes, paradoxically powerfully, the greatest, most effective, most sovereign act of power is consciously choosing to do nothing at all, to simply calmly, powerfully not engage, not play the game according to their rules. And when you begin to genuinely, consistently embody this state of conscious unreachability, of strategic non-reactivity, of quiet self-possession, something profound, almost magical, inevitably changes both within you and in the dynamics around you. The people who once easily, predictably manipulated you, who knew exactly which buttons to push to get a desired reaction, suddenly feel confused, disoriented, their usual levers rendered ineffective, their familiar power dynamic shattered. Those individuals who habitually, perhaps unconsciously, used you as a convenient emotional receptacle, a psychological dumping ground to unload their frustrations, their negativity, their unresolved issues, can no longer find the familiar, predictable, reactive echo in you, the validation their negativity craved. Those who secretly, perhaps maliciously expected, or perhaps even desired to see you eventually break down, crumble under pressure, beg for their approval or forgiveness, are instead confronted perhaps disconcertingly with your calm, unwavering, perhaps even slightly indifferent absence, your refusal to participate in their drama, and you operating now from a place of inner silence, of centered calm, of profound self-trust, simply continue moving forward steadily, purposefully on your own chosen path, largely unaffected by their attempts to derail or destabilize you. The deep, abiding, almost sacred peace that arises from no longer feeling the compulsive, exhausting need to constantly respond, perpetually clarify, incessantly prove anything fundamental to anyone, is truly, genuinely indescribable, a state beyond mere words. But achieving this state of profound inner freedom, this psychological unreachability, requires navigating a potentially brutal, often terrifying internal process. The process of genuine radical detachment. You have to consciously, deliberately, Sometimes painfully stop needing, truly deeply needing on an existential level, to be universally understood. Stop needing to be universally loved. Stop needing to be universally accepted, validated, approved of. Because as long as you continue on some fundamental, often unconscious level, desperately, silently begging, even energetically subtly for external affection, validation, recognition, or approval, you will remain psychologically reachable, vulnerable, exposed, and being perpetually reachable, perpetually exposed, inevitably means remaining perpetually vulnerable to the often subtle, sometimes overt psychological games, manipulations, and projections of others. The ultimate key, the non-negotiable foundation, lies in establishing, maintaining, and consistently enforcing clear, firm boundaries. Not boundaries that are aggressively, performatively shouted from the rooftops, constantly needing to be negotiated, debated, or justified. Not boundaries published on social media for external validation or applause. We're talking about boundaries that are primarily felt energetically, boundaries that are consistently, unwaveringly lived through your actions, your choices, your silences, boundaries that are inevitably eventually respected by others precisely because you respect them first and foremost, uncompromisingly within yourself. And when you begin to live consistently, authentically, unapologetically, with these clear, internally validated boundaries, people, the perceptive ones, the respectful ones, intuitively perceive it. And yes, you may indeed lose a few people, perhaps even significant relationships along the way as you begin to enforce these boundaries more rigorously. But understand this with absolute clarity, those were likely not genuine losses. They were necessary liberating purges, the shedding of connections that were fundamentally based on your previous lack of boundaries, on your willingness to be overly accommodating or easily controlled. Learning to effectively let go, a core component of detachment, also involves learning, often through difficult practice, not to carry emotional burdens that are not fundamentally yours. You simply cannot and should not attempt to rescue everyone who appears to be struggling. You cannot perpetually serve as the sole primary emotional support system, the psychological crutch for those individuals who demonstrate no genuine desire, no sustained effort to change, to grow, or to take responsibility for themselves, for their own emotional regulation. You cannot indefinitely, exhaustingly be the eternal shoulder to cry on the emotional garbage can for those who consistently, perhaps unconsciously, use you to dump their negativity, their unprocessed trauma, their endless complaints onto you without genuine reciprocity, without deep respect, without valuing your own well-being. Be brutally, unapologetically selective with your precious finite energy, your irreplaceable time, your sacred attention, because it is not infinite. And every single time you carelessly, habitually waste it on those individuals, those situations, those dramas that demonstrably do not value you, do not nourish you, do not contribute positively to your life, your growth, your peace, you inadvertently, tragically make yourself psychologically smaller, energetically depleted, simply to fit into cramped, unhealthy, toxic spaces where you fundamentally, soulfully shouldn't even be. Cultivated mystery, strategic silence, unwavering inner calm. These are not character flaws, not signs of social inadequacy, not indicators of emotional coldness. They are profound, often hard-won virtues possessed by those rare, powerful individuals who no longer need to shout, perform, to desperately seek external validation, simply to be heard, seen, respected. Those who no longer live primarily to impress others, but rather strive above all, simply to be authentically, deeply at peace within themselves. And that inner peace, that quiet self-possession, that unshakable centeredness is often so incredibly attractive, so undeniably magnetic, so mysteriously compelling that those who witness it often instinctively, perhaps even enviously, want to possess it themselves. But they fail fundamentally to understand that this kind of deep, abiding peace cannot be bought, faked, stolen, or achieved through external means. It is painstakingly, courageously built brick by conscious brick decision, by deliberate decision, through often painful choices, through consciously, consistently letting go of what no longer fits, what no longer serves, what diminishes the soul, through consistently, fiercely choosing yourself, your integrity, your peace above the relentless, often seductive demands and expectations of the rest of the world. So, the next time someone, anyone attempts to deliberately provoke you, to trigger your insecurities, to pull you down into their drama, their negativity, their chaos, remember this powerful, liberating truth. Not responding is often a profound declaration of power. Consciously, deliberately, not entering their game, refusing to play by their rules is in itself a definitive form of winning. Resolutely, not giving explanations, justifications, apologies, when none are truly owed, when they would only serve to empower the manipulator or drain your energy, is a vital act of protecting your precious finite vital energy. Strategic silence becomes your sharpest, most elegant sword, and unwavering conscious self-control becomes your most impenetrable resilient shield. And when you genuinely, consistently begin to embody this state of conscious psychological unreachability, not because you are fearfully defensively running away from connection or life, but because you are consciously, sovereignly choosing your engagements, your responses, your energetic investments, the world almost inevitably begins to look at you, to perceive you, perhaps even to treat you differently. Because the individual who refuses consistently to perpetually sell themselves out, compromise their core, simply for fleeting external approval, inherently possesses greater perceived and actual value. The one who consciously, deliberately doesn't seek to please everyone, who accepts the inevitability of disapproval, often paradoxically earns genuine, lasting respect even from adversaries. The one who strategically, powerfully doesn't always respond, who masters the art of silence and timing, effectively controls the conversation, the dynamic, the outcome, often without needing to open their mouth, without firing a single verbal shot. It is truly that simple, that counterintuitive, and simultaneously that brutal, that demanding in its requirement for profound self-mastery. Being psychologically unreachable in this profound, empowering context is not about disappearing from life entirely, retreating into a fearful, isolated shell. It's about learning to appear strongly, authentically, powerfully, when you consciously decide it is necessary, strategic, or appropriate. It's not about stopping feeling emotions altogether, becoming a numb automaton. It's about cultivating the profound wisdom, the emotional intelligence to know what truly deserves to be felt, deeply invested in emotionally, and what can be calmly, dispassionately observed, acknowledged, and then released without attachment, without internal destabilization. It's not about becoming coldly indifferent, callously uncaring towards the genuine suffering of others. It's about having clear, unwavering priorities rooted firmly in your own core values, your own authentic well-being, your own sense of purpose, which then allows you to engage with the world, with others, from a place of strength, clarity, and genuine capacity, rather than from a place of depletion, resentment, or obligatory compliance. And when you truly deeply understand that when you internalize this shift from external dependency to internal sovereignty, you inevitably profoundly realize that you have always possessed this inherent power. You simply perhaps tragically needed to stop handing it away so freely, so unconsciously, so habitually to anyone who asked or demanded or manipulated you into giving it up. So tell me now, honestly, as you stand at this potential crossroads of awareness, are you going to continue reflexively, habitually reacting to everything, perpetually allowing the external world, the fleeting opinions of others, the manipulative tactics of the unscrupulous to dictate who you are, how you feel, what you do, how you live your one precious life? Or are you finally, definitively, irrevocably going to begin consciously choosing what truly reaches you, what genuinely touches your core, what ultimately defines you, building an inner citadel that cannot be easily breached, because that seemingly small internal choice, that subtle yet profound shift in orientation, even if it doesn't seem monumental at first, fundamentally, unequivocally changes everything. And crucially, profoundly, you make that choice. You claim that power primarily in silence within the sovereign kingdom of your own mind, without needing to announce it, without asking for anyone's permission, without seeking external validation. Becoming consciously, strategically unreachable is at its heart perhaps the most profound, most radical act of self-love, of self-respect, of self-reclamation available to you. It's like quietly, firmly, unwaveringly telling the world, and perhaps more importantly, telling yourself, you won't automatically have access to my inner sanctum, my precious energy, my deepest, most authentic self, simply because you happen to want it, demand it, or feel entitled to it. You will gain access, if at all, only if and when I consciously choose to allow it, based on my own discernment, my own values, my own timing, and that permission, my friend, that conscious, deliberate granting of access to your inner world is sacred. Guard it fiercely, protect it diligently, cultivate it wisely. And if anyone repeatedly disrespectfully tries to cross your established boundaries without invitation, without respect, let them consistently, predictably meet the unwavering, perhaps unnerving strength of your silence as their primary, often only answer. Not because you harbour simmering hatred or festering resentment towards them, but simply, profoundly, because their attempts, their provocations, their demands no longer fundamentally affect you on that deep, reactive, vulnerable level they once did. And that cultivated inner resilience, that hard-won non-reactivity, that quiet refusal to be drawn into unnecessary drama, represents the real, lasting, unshakable victory. Unreachable, not born from defensive arrogance, not stemming from fearful coldness, but arising fundamentally, powerfully, beautifully, because finally, perhaps after a lifetime of struggle, you are becoming the undisputed sovereign master of yourself. And that state of being, that profound inner sovereignty, that quiet, unshakable presence is truly, genuinely priceless.